Hello again, gamers. Welcome back to the Board Game Captain. I'm the Board Game Captain, and today I'm going to be talking about and reviewing Vaesen, the Nordic horror role-playing game from Free League Publishing. Before we get into this, I just want to say that if you'd like to buy some cool gamer gear, t-shirts and mugs, etc., you can head on over to my Teespring store. There's a link in the description below where you can get yourself hooked up with all sorts of cool gamer gear. In addition, if you are in a position to and would like to help out the channel, you can join my Patreon, also a link in the description below. There you can get access to some videos early as well as behind-the-scenes videos, and the ability to request classic game reviews to your favorite classic games. Now, I want to thank Free League Publishing for sending me this review copy of Vaesen to play with and read and review. So Vaesen is a role-playing game that is based on a book called Vaesen by Johan Egerkens. And the lead designer on the role-playing game was Nils Hintz. The game director was Nils Karlin. And the editors were Thomas Harenstam and Matthias Johansson Hack. And of course, all of the illustrations, which are taken from the original book, are also by Johan Egerkens. So I'm going to show this all to you here. This is the big title page. So, the original author of the original book had done it as like a guidebook to monsters and creatures of Nordic mythology and legend. And what they did was, buying the rights to it, Free League turned it into an actual role-playing game that is set in the 1800s, where the players play these investigators who have the second sight. They're known as Thursday's Children. They can see the supernatural creatures, the Vaesen, even when they don't want to be seen, which is really cool, and it allows them to be able to either hunt them or solve situations involving them, mediating disputes between them and humans. Sometimes, in the occasions when Vaesen are actually the innocent parties, maybe take out some evil humans as well. So it feels like this role-playing game is sort of one of those supernatural monster of the week type shows. So think Grimm, where they also use the term Vaesen, or Buffy the Vampire Slayer, or I'm trying to think of some other really good examples like that. But there's Supernatural, of course. There's a bunch of them out there that have been these kind of supernatural fantasy, but in modern day usually monster of the week sort of shows. This case, instead of doing it modern day, they do it in the 1800s. You can set it any time during the 1800s. My personal favorite, of course, being Victorian time. I love to do stuff in Victorian time. But yeah, that's the idea of this role-playing game. So now let's have a look at what is actually in the various chapters of this book. So it starts with a little preface that is by the author of the original guide. And then once we move past the preface, you have the introduction. So the introduction gives you an idea of the world and what it's like, as well as giving a little bit of a sample of an actual role-play session, which is something that is smattered throughout the book, and I really like. I've seen this done in other role-playing games before. This is not unique to Vaesen, but this is a really cool way to give you an idea of how you would actually play out a role-playing game, because they have a couple of players and a game master discussing various things as little asides to the text to give you an idea of context of what the text is talking about and how it would apply to an actual game. So as you move on through the introduction, again, it gives you an idea on how you play role-playing games, what the world is like, lots of wonderful pictures of artwork, which of course I'm going to be showing up here on the screen as I'm talking, how to run a campaign, big principles in how to run the game, the basics of how the game works, basic ideas, and then you get into building a player character. So now, in the Your Player Character chapter, it goes over both the rules for making the character and also some really good ideas to work with in regard to coming up with backstory and archetype and what your character is actually going to be like in the game, so you know how to inhabit them, how to play them, as well as, again, specifically the mechanics of how to build them statistically. Now, the game here works off the Year Zero engine, which is an engine that if you have played other Free League games, you're probably familiar with, because the vast majority of Free League's role-playing games do work off the Year Zero engine or a variation thereof. This is yet another variation on that system. The basic idea is that when you're statting out your character, you have attributes and you have skills, and the number is how many dice, six-sided dice, all of them just six-sided dice, how many you grab for a particular test. So if you're trying to test something, you find the relative attribute, you grab that many dice. If your attribute is 3, you grab 3 dice. You find the relative skill, you grab that many dice. Let's say if the skill is 2, you get another 2 dice, you're now up to 5. And then if you have a piece of equipment or a weapon, that might give you more dice. So let's say you have a piece of equipment that gives you 1 more die, you add 1 more die to it, you roll all the dice and you're looking for 6s. A simple task would need 1 6. More complicated or advanced tasks might need 2, or if it's very difficult, even 3 6s. And then if it's an opposed roll, both you and your opponent will roll, and whoever has the more 6s will succeed. And that's generally how it works. Now, if you get injured in this, there are no hit points, you take conditions. Physical conditions are exhausted, battered, and wounded. Mental conditions you can take are angry, frightened, and hopeless. And each of these will give you a -1 to all rolls cumulatively. So if you get all 3 physical conditions, you're going to get -3. Cumulatively to all physical or mental, depending on which type of condition it is, rolls from that time on until that condition is healed and removed. If you fill up all 3, the physical or the mental conditions, you can become broken, which can lead to possible permanent injury or even possible death of the character. And generally speaking, the other way you can get these negative conditions is by pushing your roll. So if you roll and you don't get any 6s, or you don't get enough 6s, you can try to re-roll all the dice that were not 6s, but you will take one of these negative conditions. And that's, other than getting injured or harmed by an enemy or NPC, that is the other way that you will wind up taking negative conditions. Now, the next part in here in this chapter for the characters gives you tons of what they refer to as archetypes. Now, archetypes are sort of like character classes in other role-playing games, and there are tons of them in here, and they're really cool, and they give you lots of ideas for playing characters of those types. You have academics, doctors, hunters, occultists, officers, priests, private detectives, servants, vagabonds, writers, and all of these character types have multiple options for ideas for their backstory and the nitty-gritty and tiny details that would go into actually fleshing out your writer or your private detective. There's even one with the, I believe it's called the occultist, where they have a possible backstory where they can actually have been a changeling, which is a child that was swapped between a fairy's child and a human child. The fairy left their fairy child and stole a human child to raise as their own, and that's why they have occultist abilities. The character classes in this, or archetypes, are really cool, really creative, and I like them very much. Next, we have a chapter on skills that goes into all of the skills, how skill tests work, and what are the uses for all of those skills. And then the next chapter is talents. Now, talents are, you know, like from other games, you might have seen them called edges or feats or something of that sort. They're extra cool abilities. Every character gets to start with one talent from their own archetype or class. And as you level up, you can gain other talents even from other archetypes, which is really cool. They give you all sorts of interesting abilities. So there are 3 talents listed for each of the archetypes, and all of them are really interesting. And again, the starting ones are really big into helping you flesh out your character and figure out what they're good at, things that they're really awesome with. So for instance, and then there's a bunch of general talents also that can be chosen by everybody when they're leveling up. But for instance, let me throw out a couple here. So the private detective, which is a particularly cool character class if you want to play something like a Sherlock Holmes type character investigating supernatural cases. You can take the talent Eagle Eye, which gives you +2 to your vigilance when trying to interpret a situation you are involved in. excuse me, you are not involved in. My mistake. Elementary is the second town. Once per session, you can ask the game master to explain how clues are connected. This is really cool to help you play a character that might be more clever than you are. I mean, if you're playing someone like Sherlock Holmes, it can be very difficult to play a character who is so incredibly observant and intelligent when you yourself are an average person like most of us are. So this is a cool way to force inspiration for your character that you're maybe not getting. And focused. Ignore penalties from conditions when making investigation tests. So this allows you to never take negatives from those mental abilities when investigating. So the talents are like these. They're very interesting and they're very cool, and they help you to get new and interesting abilities. The next chapter is conflict and injuries, and it goes over all the specifics of how combat works in this game system and how you would take injuries and how you would check when going back after a game to see if any of your injuries have lasting or permanent effects. And there's a giant critical injury table for both physical and mental injuries, so you can see if you've become broken either physically or mentally, what happens to you. And I mean, they can be things from just a foot injury to a crushed chest. You could wind up in a coma or with a cracked skull. Or on the mental side, it could be minor things like confused or overwhelmed, all the way down to having a split personality disorder, or possibly becoming possessed by a supernatural entity. So these are really cool, and it is also really cool for when a character survives these horrific encounters, but should have lasting effects, that there is a way to figure out what those lasting effects are. You roll on the tables. This chapter also goes over fear and how your characters might react to fear. There are choices in this rather than a random roll. You roll first to see if you succumb to fear. All monsters and situations that are horrific will have a rating for their fear value. So smaller, less scary monsters might have a fear of 1, whereas incredibly horrific monsters might have a fear of 3, as well as finding a bloody corpse might have a fear of 1, while finding a mass grave of rotting bodies might have a fear of 3. And if you fail your fear test, you then have to choose whether you flee, freeze, faint, or fly into a rage and attack the enemy. And you get to pick that. I like that that's not random, that you don't just randomly roll and be like, oh crud, I guess I freeze. You can pick, do you freeze, do you run away, or do you just fly into a rage and attack? So you can pick kind of the more advantageous of these negative reactions. So if it's a monster, you might want to fly into a rage and attack, even if maybe that's not going to help you, because it might be better than fleeing and deserting the party. Then also in this chapter, we have rules for explosions, for fires, for healing injuries, for poison, for equipment and services, as well as a huge table of bits of equipment and what kind of help they can give you, as well as weapons and things like that, before we head on to the next chapter, which is the Society and the Headquarters. Now, the Society is the group that you as players will belong to that investigates the troubles with the Vaesen in the vast frozen north of Europe here. And it allows you to have a group and a fallback point. The Headquarters is your fallback point, where you have, it's an old decrepit castle. It starts with a library and not much else. But as you go on, and this is one of my favorite parts of this system in this book, is they have the ability that you as players can spend resources on upgrading the Headquarters. Again, you start out with a library and not much else, but the library is a good place to start with. In an adventure, when you find out about strange goings-on, you can do research at the library before heading out to know what kind of enemies you might be facing and pick up appropriate equipment before heading out there to find these enemies. But as you go on, you will repair your castle, your Headquarters, and then you will further upgrade it. You'll upgrade it by fixing existing parts of the castle or adding new ones. And you will also start hiring employees as you become more successful, starting with a butler, and as you go on, you will hire other employees. And all of these upgrades, all of these employees and these new rooms will give you access to extra resources that you can have for your adventures. So, for instance, here's one of the basic. Here's one upgrade I'll give you as an example. We have the Armory. It's the first one because they're listed alphabetically. The prerequisite is you have to have 5 resources and a weapon corridor. It costs you 5 resources, and the function is during the preparation phase, each level allows the player characters to bring a melee weapon or an armor from availability level 2 without using resources. Normally you have to spend resources to get the right equipment you want before every adventure, but this allows you to get some free equipment above and beyond your resources. You can spend your resources on other things. But there's tons of stuff in here that gives you all sorts of advantages in other ways. For instance, the Infirmary, which of course gives you advantages to heal. The Carp Pond, which gives you the ability to calm yourself from mental harm that you have received. You've got a kennel, a library. You can open a local tavern. This is one where it's not actually an upgrade to your castle, but something you can, as players, own a tavern in the town, which also can give you aid in recovering by having some downtime and enjoying yourself over at the tavern. There's tons, and I do mean tons, of upgrades you can have to your headquarters. And again, you also can get servants that you can get to help you as well, like coachmen, chefs, guards, new recruits to the organization, which can also help you as an NPC. In addition, like with the local tavern, there are people you can get that can help you that are not actually residents of your headquarters. For instance, you could make a contact with a police constable who can give you aid in investigations in the local town, because some of your games should take place in the town where your headquarters is, rather than having to go visiting other cities or even other countries, though you will do those in other games. The next chapter after that is the Mythic North and Uppsala. Now, Uppsala is the city where your headquarters is at. It is a city in Sweden, and it is where a good number of your games will take place. But the Mythic North is huge, and it takes up a good portion of Northern Europe. You can go adventuring in Norway, in Denmark, in Finland, in parts of Germany, and the Netherlands even. There's bits, here's a good example. There's a map here. I'm going to show a picture up on the screen that shows the general region you're going to go adventuring in, which is basically all of Northern Europe. Now, this chapter gives you an idea of what life was like in the 1800s in Uppsala and in Northern Europe in general. I really like this one because for a game master, this really helps you to understand the mentality of people of the time, what society was like at the time, what technology was like at the time. They go into great detail on things like the university in Uppsala, which was a real thing. They had a university that was opened there, as well as what the police practices were like at the time, as well as the fact that there was a mental asylum in Uppsala at the time, and what life was like for people in that asylum. There was a poorhouse there where people could be locked up for poverty, and what the poorhouse was like in Uppsala at that time. They also go over the local newspaper, the Uppsala Gazette, as well as the Uppsala Botanical Gardens. Just lots of things that help you understand what it was like to live in the 1800s in Sweden, which, whether or not you're Swedish, you may not be familiar with, because this is a very specific time in history, and there's a lot of little details that get glossed over for us when we're learning history in school. They might talk about how we mistreated the mentally ill, but maybe they didn't talk specifically about the nitty-gritty about how law enforcement worked or about poorhouses. And that's all in here, and I really like that. It's a great resource for the game master for helping to develop the world. Then the next chapter is a very fun chapter. It is the Vaesen. So here we go into an explanation of the Vaesen, and this is a chapter that's for game master eyes only. So I'm not going to go too deep into it because it's an explanation of the nitty-gritty of exactly how Vaesen work. And the thing is, a lot of the fun of this game is figuring out how each individual Vaesen work, because many Vaesen have magical powers. There are powers like enchantments, curses, and trollcraft. And many of the Vaesen will have 1, 2, or maybe even all 3 of those types of abilities to have access to, and learning how they work and what their limitations are a big part of the fun of the game, as well as learning what the weaknesses are for the Vaesen in general. I'm going to quickly list off some of the Vaesen here, and each of the Vaesen are fully statted out, though their stats are fairly simple. They really only have a handful of statistics. Usually it's might, body control, magic, manipulation, fear, and then they list their magical powers they have access to, as well as their combat abilities and how much damage they would do. And then they will give you an explanation of that Vaesen, as well as examples of conflicts that could involve that Vaesen. So I'm going to go through what some of the Vaesen are that are included here. Actually, I'll go through all of them, and I'm going to show some pictures up on screen of what these Vaesen look like. So we have the Ash Tree Wife, which is a nature spirit. We have the Brook Horse, which is a supernatural horse that lives in rivers. We have the Church Grim. We have fairies, of course. We have ghosts, because what supernatural tale is complete without ghosts? We have giants, which can be quite frightening. We have the Lindworms, which are sort of like serpentine dragons. We have the Mare, a truly frightening creature, if I do say so myself. We have mermaids. We have the Myling, one of my favorite bits of artwork in here, specifically for these Vaesen. We have the Neck, which is not a type of creature, but a specific creature that could be a reoccurring NPC and possible antagonist for your adventures. We have the Night Ravens. We have Nis. We have Revenants, a bit of the undead, if you will. We have Sea Serpents for your sailing adventures. We have Spiritus, which are strange little impish insectoid demonic creatures. We have Trolls, of course, because you're in the north, you have to have Trolls. We have Vaetir, which are a far less, generally far less scary Vaesen to run into. One that can just about as often be a positive experience as a negative one. We have the Werewolf. You know you're going to run a game with a werewolf if you're doing a supernatural 1800s investigation and hunting game. We have Will o' the Wisp, and we have the Woodwife. Then after that, we have tons of NPCs, standard human non-player characters, fully statted out for all sorts of characters you could run into, which is a great reference for the Game Master, as well as standard animals. Then the next chapter is the Mystery. Now this helps to give advice to the Game Master on how to structure a actual mystery game, because this game is really all about the players trying to figure things out, figure out what the real issue is, figure out why the ghost cannot rest, figure out what harm was done, figure out who is the bad guy, and if the bad guy is the Vaesen, figure out how to harm or get rid of the Vaesen, because a lot of times the Vaesen need to be removed in very specific ways, or they will just come back, even if you thought you might have killed them. This is great. It's also then filled with tons of tables to help you come up with adventures. You could roll randomly or select things off the tables, which is really awesome. A full explanation of how to structure campaigns, including how to occasionally have the things that you're doing out in the world affect you back at your headquarters as stuff comes back home, follows you back home, or affects you back home, and why it is that maybe every third game or so should be in Uppsala around the headquarters rather than going out like to Denmark or Finland for an adventure. Then we have the Dance of Dreams. Now, I'm not going to talk too deeply about this because I don't want to ruin anything. The Dance of Dreams is an actual adventure, and it's a good one. There's tons of mystery. It's really well structured. The NPCs are brilliant. It's creepy. It's cool. There's handouts to Xerox and give out to your player characters for when they discover certain things. It's a really, and I do mean really well done adventure. And in addition to being a really cool adventure that I would certainly run with a group if I was playing Vaesen right now, I'd run it probably as the first adventure to introduce everything. It also then will give you some great ideas on how to structure your own adventures, and that is also really awesome. Then we have some alternate rules on figuring out your background using tables. You could do some random rolls for your background if you're having trouble figuring out the background for your character, and those tables round out the book with your character sheet, which is in the back, which is a couple of pages of information that is pretty well organized here. You've got your conditions listed, you've got your skills, which will tell you what specific abilities they're related to. You've got spots for your talents, your insights, your relationships to other characters, your equipment, your weapons, your armor, of course, your actual attributes, the physique, precision, logic, and empathy up top, as well as a second sheet for upgrades to your facility, for contacts you've made in the world and at home. And yeah, this is really well done. So you're probably going to have one of these facility sheets for the whole group. And of course, everyone's going to have their own character sheet. So, all right. So first off, I want to talk about the production on this book because it's awesome. It's really well done. They did like a cloth cover. Is really nice. It's got a lovely texture to it. There's like a bit of like spot shininess, spot optics maybe to the name Vaesen, and then a really great cover art. It's got an old school thread binding, and also there is a cloth bookmark included. The pages are matte, not glossy, but while I do like glossy pages, I do feel that being that this is trying to give a historic and classic feel to it because it takes place in the 1800s, that the matte is actually more appropriate. So overall, I would say the production on this is phenomenal. And that's not a surprise because Free League is always top tier production. They're one of the best producers of role-playing games out there, so that is absolutely no surprise to me. Now, the game system is again, another adaptation of the Year Zero engine. I would say it's more advanced than, say, the system they used for Tales from the Loop, but less advanced than, say, the one they used for the Alien role-playing game, and significantly less advanced than Forbidden Lands. So it's a fairly rules-light, easy to pick up, easy to learn, easy to play system, but a step up in complexity from Tales from the Loop. And it's actually really well done. I think it's a really good implementation of the system. It's actually, in my opinion, of all the versions of the system I've read, I think this is my second favorite implementation of the Year Zero engine. I think it's incredibly well done and really works well for this whole mystery theme and supernatural theme that they're going for. And that is really, really awesome. The adventure that is in here is fantastic. The group of monsters they have selected are fantastic. They also give you advice on creating your own monsters, because you can make your own monsters from other parts of the world or other monsters from Northern Europe. They also recommend buying the original Vaesen book to use as a guidebook for your player characters as like a prop, and I think that's really cool. And you can make monsters from that as well. And it's since the rules are fairly light, it's easy to stat out other monsters. So yeah, this game is very characterful. Very cool, lots of details, awesome monsters, easy to use system, easy to run, wonderful world, fantastic artwork, and great production. If you can't tell, I am gushing about this book because it was a joy to read, and it is absolutely awesome. So we have come to that part of the review where after gushing about it, I'm going to give it a really high rating, and that shouldn't be a surprise considering how much I've been gushing. So I'm going to give Vaesen 9 out of 10 stars. This game is fantastic, truly phenomenal. I love it, and I want to run a game of it. I'm in the middle of running another role-playing game right now, but I'm already planning to run a campaign in this at some point in the future when I'm not already running so many other games and such. But yeah, this is really, really cool, and I absolutely love the whole Monster of the Week feel, investigation feel from shows like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Supernatural, or Grimm that you get in here, but mixed with a Victorian era feel. And I absolutely adore that. I think it's fantastic, and it is a really, really cool idea for a role-playing game. I think they really hit it out of the park with this one. So that is Vaesen from Free League Publishing. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns on Vaesen that you'd like me to answer, feel free to put them in the comments down below. And do stay tuned, because Free League sent me lots of their other stuff for Vaesen. They sent me the dice, They sent me the card deck, and they sent me the Game Master screen, which also comes with a big fold-out map where one half is Northern Europe and the other half is Uppsala. So I'm going to be doing reviews on all this stuff as well, so stay tuned to see some more reviews on some Vaesen products. If you enjoyed this video and you'd like to see me do more reviews of role-playing game products like this, be sure to give this video a like, share it on all forms of social media, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to the Board Game Captain. That's Captain spelt with a K on YouTube. And until next time, game on.